Alrighty, hello everyone. So a while back, a few months ago at this point actually, a very lovely commenter of mine, Lane, had asked me where I think the enjoyment of giant tiny comes from. Why do people like the concept of giants and tinies? Or macro, micro. And I was fascinated by the question at the time. And I really didn't want to give too simple of an answer. I really wanted to properly explore it. And at the time it was asked during a Q&A, and I really didn't want to answer a question there for like an hour. So I said at the time I'd work on a proper answer and I'd, take some time. And I kind of figured eventually I'd have a confident enough claim or series of claims that I would feel properly comfortable making this audio and talking about why I think people enjoy giant tiny GT, or macro micro or size difference. And honestly, even to this point, I'm not fully confident in what I'm going to say. However, I am confident enough, and just recently, someone actually asked me the same basic question, but with vor. Why do people enjoy that? And I felt it would be remiss to even begin answering that question before I gave a proper spotlight to this one. So we'll see if I do another one of these for vor, if I just give a more blanket statement. This might just be what I do now. Making essays. But I digress. Today I wanted to talk about why people enjoy size difference, macro, micro, or GT. I'll be using all three terms kind of interchangeably. I'm aware that some people consider them to be three distinct separate things. However, I do believe that many things can carry over from all three of them. So I will be using all three terms, though more than likely I will be using GT as the standard. Now, before we begin, I will say that I do like GT. I find it very interesting. I think it's an excellent plot device for media. And I also find it very flustering. There are many, many ways you can use GT in visual art, in written art, audios, roleplay, etc. And outside of my audios that I make on this channel, I do enjoy GT in both a wholesome and a mature sense. So, with that in mind, I will be primarily covering this topic from a wholesome lens. This is meant to be relaxing, after all. However, there will be a few points where I will discuss the more mature adult side of GT. And I will give a warning beforehand. However, if you believe such conversations as a whole or such chance of hearing it will be upsetting for you, I completely understand, and you are welcome to click off the audio at any point in time. Also in mind, some of this commentary will be from my own opinions and experiences, and some will be from conversations I've had with other people regarding GT and why they enjoy it. However, I want to be very clear and say that I'm not a professional psychologist. I do not study these things in any professional or academic capacity, and I have not done any professional or academic research or read any papers or anything like that. This ASMR audio essay is going to be purely based off of anecdotal evidence, so please be advised. Now, with that caveat out of the way, I will be doing my best to find the root causes for why people like size difference or GT. And what I mean by that is, what might someone want in real life that they can find, or at least engage with in some way, when engaging with this particular interest? Why would someone want to be big or small, outside of simply wanting to see someone who's large or wanting to see someone who's small? So the first reason, and perhaps the most obvious reason that I came across, is a difference in power, of course. I mean, it's kind of a given. When there is an extreme size difference, there must therefore be an extreme difference in power and capability. And I would like to include a few different words or phrases I think are synonymous with what I mean here. When I say power, I mean capability, I mean accessibility, being able to think about doing something and then being able to do it. I mean control, being able to stop undesirable things from happening to you, or simply independence, not having to rely on someone's kindness or pity to accomplish what you seek to accomplish. Now, as a micro, this sort of manifests as a lack of power. You are functionally helpless. Whether your micro status is because you're an outlier in a world not designed for you, or because you're in the presence of someone who is the outlier being several times your size. Either way, you are at the mercy of at least one larger being. And as such, despite the perils this predicament comes with, you nonetheless get to, through the act of being helpless and powerless, negate the pressure and stress of your regular life. You know, you don't have to worry about your job or your school, because what is a job in the face of a giant's hand plucking you up from the sidewalk? What are academic pursuits compared to the endless studying of your giant friend or captor's body? You know, what are the opinions of others when a singular person has become your entire world? And similarly, if the giant is nice, or sometimes even if they aren't, they can handle many of your problems for you. You're not being required to. You can sort of sit back and let them handle everything. And in the reverse, as a macro or a giant, you hold immense power. You don't need to worry about anything because you're in control of pretty much everything. But more importantly, this is not a control that you have to fight for. It's not something you have to constantly be on to maintain. If you want to stop those bullies from hurting that person, you can just reach down and give them a flick with your fingers. If your boss deserves a timeout after a tense conversation, you can just put them in your mouth or swallow them. If your best friend needs comfort after a hard day or month or year, you can just put them on your chest, rest your hand on them, and let them relax knowing that you have them. Ultimately, as the giant of a situation, I think you have the power to keep things you don't like from happening. And you don't have to fight that. You don't have to struggle. You can just will it to be so, and it will be so. Now, something I think is interesting is when the roles are reversed, and I do know some people enjoy this. When the giant submits themselves to the whims of the tiny, when the micro holds power over the macro. I'll confess I haven't met many people who enjoy this particular role reversal, so I'm not entirely sure why. However, if I had to make a few broader, sweeping statements, I would imagine that the same applies to what I previously stated, just in reverse. A giant who is controlled by a tiny has, physically, immense power, but isn't expected, or perhaps even allowed, to use it, save for what they're told to do. Yes, they're entirely and effortlessly capable, but they also don't have to actively control everything. They can flick their brain off for a bit and be safe in knowing that someone else is taking care of the management and the brain-intensive, the hard stuff of their power. They can just be strong and do what they're told and be enough doing what they're told. In other words, I think being a giant under the control of a tiny allows you to feel power and feel powerful without having to feel the responsibility that comes with it. It allows you to take a load off and simply exist without necessarily having to give up your status as someone who is capable of doing things. As for tinies controlling giants, I would presume it's the same sort of concept. You have immense power, it's just not something actively seen, because it's manifested in someone else. People can underestimate you. They can assume that you're frail and helpless and pathetic, but you ultimately know the truth. You know that you, despite what you may seem and what others may call you, you know that you are in control. That everything you allow to happen to you ultimately happens because you allow it to. And if that isn't enough, you also have the ability, through whatever means, to literally control the uncontrollable. You have ultimate power in the form of a literal giant towering above you, bowing to you and you alone, for whatever reason, willful submission, or because some hidden power that you have that lets you control them, or because you're the only micro with a particular bit of knowledge and they need it. whatever the reason, you aren't expected to control everything because others don't expect you to have the ability to. But when the time comes for it, you can control whatever you need to. So, in that sense, if being a giant under the control of a tiny is being someone who is capable without having responsibility, being a tiny who is controlling the giant is not having responsibility because of perceived incapability, while still being capable enough to do what you need. So, I think, yeah, that's part of it. Ultimately, as a micro, you're freed of responsibility due to a perceived lack of power. Meanwhile, as a macro, your immense power makes whatever responsibilities you have trivial. For me, I know that part of my enjoyment of being a macro stems from the ability I'd gained to comfort people. For a brief moment, I can be so large that I can be their entire world. Their tiny body resting on the vastness of my chest or the crook of my neck, or getting cozy in the warm embrace of my stomach, receiving a nice gentle massage from my fingertips. It's nice to have things be simple like that for a time, and to imagine being able to help relieve someone's pain by removing whatever is causing that pain, by replacing it with myself, a big, vast, loving force. Now, in addition to power, I think another part of why people like Giant Tiny comes down to the concept of respect or value, which is something I sort of implicitly mentioned previously. But getting more into it, of course, respect, value, having others care about you, having others consider your wants and needs, not getting spoken over, not being ignored, being given both what you require as well as what you want. As a macro, of course, there is inherently value and respect that comes with your role. You're huge, after all. And you could, if you so desired, destroy anyone and anything that stands in your way. So inherently, people should respect you. You can also use this power, of course, as a giant to help others, which can add value to you. You can use your immense size to gain the appreciation of others, or even if you don't necessarily help, simply being so big can often be appreciated by other people. Being so strong is something people can put value in. But you will always have respect, even if you don't have people valuing your presence. Because you are such a large force, people have to respect you, but they don't necessarily have to love you or even like you. But that itself leads to an interesting conversation. What about love? Who loves a hulking beast? A monster, perhaps? Many times when I see giant tiny stories, the giant is feared, in the beginning at least, by one or more tinies within the story. They are respected, of course. Their power is something that nobody can deny, and thus the act of their existence is something people must pay attention to. But they are still outcast until one or more of these micros, these tinies, has a seed of trust planted within them. A crumb of bravery, a drop of understanding, and slowly, what was simply respect for a powerful but horrifying outsider becomes love, trust, admiration, and appreciation. And as with before, it gives value to the giant, past simply, you are big, and if I don't want to die, I will respect your wishes. And if you're someone who feels like the outsider in your own life, if you are someone who is mocked, discarded, or feared for one reason or another, it can be very cathartic to tell a story, to view art, to engage in media where someone who was reviled becomes, through moments of kindness and compassion, someone who is loved and valued genuinely and truly. So, what of the micros then? What is love and respect for a micro in this situation? It's a bit easier in some ways, I think. You're small. By all means, according to the logic of you being the tiny and powerless being compared to a powerful and immense being, you don't inherently gain respect or value. There's no reason, in most cases, that a giant has to keep their tiny companion around. And yet, you are being kept around. As a micro, you're still being given value by the mere fact that this immense being is showing interest in you. Your value is sort of not necessarily earned in a particular way, but rather given to you freely. Even, granted, if the only reason this value is being given is for entertainment, or because you're willing to bow to this giant's whims, that nonetheless does give you an inherent value, not something earned, not something you have to jump through hoops for. And that value constitutes kindness, or mercy, or even love from a being that by no means has an obligation to even consider you. And of course, this can manifest in different ways, but even in the, shall we say, less respectful considerations on behalf of the giant, you're still given some worth there. I think similar to the conversation of power, both being big and being small can provide an easy access to someone valuing you or someone respecting you. There's no fight to it. You don't have to jump through hoops or navigate difficult situations, try to guess what other people are thinking. You simply are given respect and value. Or, if you aren't given respect and value, that isn't something that is unique to you. It's somewhat likely predetermined by the difference in your size compared to this other being that's refusing to respect and value you. Now, alternatively, if it is part of your GT or macrophilia preferences to be forced by another individual to jump through hoops, to guess their every move and desire, only to ultimately fail, then I think it allows for some control of that outcome. You're not being unfairly set up for failure because of unforeseen circumstances or because you couldn't read minds well enough. This isn't like real life where you must constantly adapt to a situation, change your opinions, change your tone, change your actions, and pray that you can make it through without humiliating yourself or worse. When failure is a given, you are able to prematurely accept that failure and instead live in acceptance and anticipation of the consequences. Something that you likely were able to help decide as the person with this preference, with this fantasy, and something that you are probably looking forward to engaging with, even if, in actuality, you wouldn't enjoy those consequences in real life. Now, of course, with that in mind, fair warning here, this particular topic that I'm going to be discussing is something that I think most would likely consider focused more towards adults regarding Giant Tiny. I don't think it necessarily has to be, and I think, in fact, it's something that many of us can find relatable in our own lives. But it is, as I said, I think something most people would consider focused more towards adults. So if you'd like to stop listening here or skip ahead to the end, I understand. There should be a timestamp in the description if you'd like to skip ahead there. So, when it comes to macro, micro, or GT, or big people and little people, I do think that humiliation is absolutely a cause for some folks' enjoyment. And when I say humiliation, I use that term kind of as a blanket term, but I mean, in a sense, a reversal of the aforementioned concepts of value, respect, and power. Some people absolutely want to explore the concept of removing value from someone or from themselves. The concept of being teased, being taunted, and put in situations that no average, respected, and respectable human would be put in. Of being taken out of acceptable, civilized society and being put into something outside of it. And I'll get into why I think this might be the case in a minute, but first, what do I mean? Well, as a micro, being humiliated could manifest as being so incredibly small that you're forced to live the mercy and amusement of another being, bending to their will, accepting whatever punishments or situations they desire to put you in, etc. Being alive not because you're precious or worthy in some way, but simply because the giant holding you hostage finds some reason or another to keep you in their possession. Or, in the reverse, being the tiny and yet being the humiliating force could manifest as being so tiny, so ordinarily insignificant, yet having complete control, one way or another, over someone immensely larger than you. By all means, you should be groveling beneath them. And yet, in this moment, you've stripped their power away, in spite of their size. You've stripped what makes them inherently superior, and you are now lording over them. Meanwhile, as a macro, being the humiliating force, this can manifest as being so incredibly big that you can inflict cruel and unjust situation on others, forcing them to worship you lest they suffer your wrath, or not even paying mind enough to give them the option to worship or earn your mercy. One step, one careless movement, and now another being is forced to bend to your will in one way or another, perhaps without you even noticing. However, being macro, being large, and yet being the one who is being humiliated could manifest in, despite your seeming ability to take charge of whoever, however, and whenever you want, still being bent to the will of someone so much smaller than you that it's almost comedic. For whatever reason, you have no choice but to do as they wish, to omit your power and follow the commands of someone distinctly not your equal. That you should be ruling over them, yet here you are obeying them. Now, here's the part where I admit I'm not entirely sure why this concept of humiliation, of being stripped of, in many ways, basic decency, is so appealing. However, I'm willing to take a stab at why it might be the case. Admittedly, I myself enjoy exploring these topics, which makes it all the more frustrating when I can't give a solid answer. Because I'd love to say, this is exactly why you're feeling this. This is why I feel this. This is the reasoning behind everything. But I'm not sure. But if I had to guess, I could see a few reasons why being made fun of, being degraded in many ways, can be seen as appealing. In terms of the one in power, the one removing another's dignity, it can be invigorating. Perhaps even relieving if the person that you're acting against is a stand-in for something troubling you in your own life. Or even if it's not personal, it can feel cathartic to have justice served to an otherwise unjust person, as they are humiliated and made a fool. It can also simply feel nice to have power over someone and to interact with them in a way where you can enact whatever you want upon them. And all they can do is accept your bidding. And that's something I'd like to expand upon in a minute. But first, in terms of the one being out of power, the one being humiliated, I think in many ways it can be a way to reclaim those feelings. The feeling of humiliation, of being powerless. I'm struggling with wording here a bit, but it can be a way, I think, to consensually and safely reenact situations or stand-ins for situations where you previously felt embarrassed, powerless, or humiliated. And by reenacting those situations, you're able to refrain them from something negative, where you were made to feel small, and you can reframe them into something positive, maybe even flustering, as certain words or certain tones, certain actions or tropes or characters are used that you enjoy. Therefore, letting you not see what has happened to you previously as something that was against your will, something that was used against you, but something now that is being used to enable you, to let you enjoy yourself. I also imagine, similarly to how humiliating others can give you a sense of power and let you feel strong for interacting with people in ways that society usually would never allow. Being humiliated grants that same catharsis of relieving yourself of power. And what I mean by that is, when you're stripped of your dignity, when you're stripped of your decency, and in a sense, when you're stripped of your right to be treated well, regardless of who you are and what you are, you're also, in that same process, being relieved of the expectation to act a certain way. You're being relieved of polite culture where you have to behave yourself. You have to be good, and you have to not make a scene. You don't overshare too much. Don't be too much for this person. Don't be too weird. Don't be yourself. In a sense, I think by interacting with others, whether you are the one degrading, humiliating, or when you are interacting with others by being degraded and humiliated, it sets you outside of society's expectations in such a way where you have nothing else to be but yourself. Even if that's played up a bit, because you're taunting and degrading and poking fun at someone, or because you are the one who is being degraded and poked fun at. Regardless, you have no reason to be anything else except for yourself. And I think that can be very freeing. Of course, there are other reasons people would enjoy GT as well. In particular, I find many explorations of GT, both safe for work and not safe for work, feature a certain wonder, an amazement, a fascination with the world up close. Whether that be the body of another person, the grass, someone's lawn, the structure of a everyday use object that goes largely unconsidered by its users. And of course, that fascination itself can stem from various sources. And there are, as I said, other reasons for enjoying GT, even beyond that. Everyone's experience is going to be different. However, I hope I've covered 3 of perhaps the more common reasons why people enjoy GT. They're certainly the most common ones that I found referenced by other people, or that I felt were the root reasonings people were giving me. Now, given what I've just said, I do want to discuss the topic of real life, and how for many of us, the things we do enjoy in concept, we would hate in actuality. This is not a bad thing in my mind. If anything, it's a good thing. To me, it shows that our minds have a very clear boundary of what is and isn't acceptable in real life, as well as what is conceptually fascinating but actually horrible. For an obvious example, I imagine many of us who watch horror movies, myself included, enjoy the feeling of our hearts racing, of our adrenaline pumping, and so on. But we would not actually want to be chased by a murderer, or haunted by a ghost, or trapped in some deadly situation. Or, for a perhaps less obvious example, fantasy books. I'm sure conceptually many of us love thinking of wizards, dragons, knights, goblins, unicorns, and so on. But rarely do I think any of us would actually want to run the risk of being burnt to a crisp by a flying reptile, getting cursed by some malevolent force who said, "Fuck you," to us specifically. That in mind, that is why I've tried to rather intentionally seek out the core concepts of why GT and size difference are so well liked. Because the way I see it personally, these core concepts, whether all of them, or some of them, just one of them, they're ultimately the root of what people are pursuing through GT. Regardless of the route they take to explore them. And the pursuit of these concepts could be for various reasons, Some people might feel like they're lacking in one of these concepts and want to provide themselves with it. Some people might want to instill in others the concepts that they feel they specialize in, provide an outlet for them in some way. They might simply want to explore these concepts through a fantastical lens with no necessarily personal tie to it. And all this is a very long-winded way of saying, regardless of how you choose to interact with size difference, or macro, micro, or GT, however you want to put it, you are still valid. I believe many people, myself unfortunately included, feel shame for enjoying GT. Yeah, it's a bit weird liking the idea of big people, small people interacting. It's going to be weird regardless with the way that those giants and tinies interact, whether it's wholesome and fluffy, or steamy and sexual, or horrific and disturbing. It's all going to be weird. And yeah, the idea of some limited people having immense power that they can then use to either assist or hinder or terrify a weaker and less capable population is extremely weird. But we're not talking about superheroes, we are talking about macro-micro. Jokes aside, the point I want to make very clear here is that everything is weird. Everything. It's just that some things are weird and popular, and some things are weird and niche. GT is weird and niche. That's all. So please, don't feel shame for how you interact with this concept and with this community. Yes, it's weird. And some people who don't understand it will think that you are weird. But the ones who do understand will understand. And they'll be glad you're here. They'll be glad that you're engaging in the ways that they engage. So, yeah. I hope this perhaps sheds some light on why certain people like giant, tiny content. Why they like making it, they like consuming it, they like engaging with it. And I hope it has helped some of you better understand yourselves as well. Moreover, I would be greatly interested in hearing why you, lovely folks, enjoy Giant Tiny. Whether it's for any of the reasons that I mentioned above, or if it's for different reasons. Actually, I would be especially curious if you enjoyed GT for different reasons than the ones I listed. This is a topic that deeply fascinates me, so I'm always eager to hear others' takes. And hopefully it can fill in some of the areas that I'm still in the dark on. Who knows, maybe in another year I'll make another one of these with a bit more information, a bit more detail. In any case, I do appreciate you all being here and listening to me talk. I am a very lucky man getting to discuss this. And your support, your interest means the world to me. As a Final Fantasy XIV boss once said, your support means the world to me, everyone. Have a wonderful night, or a wonderful day, or whenever you're listening to this. Rest well, and take care of yourself.